Virus claims black morticians, leaving holes in communities when the last mourners departed and funeral director Shawn Troy was left among the headstones. He wept alone for 5 decades. The closing words at countless funerals in this town of 4,400 had been delivered by his father, William Penn Troy Sr. Now the elder Troy was gone. One of many black morticians claimed by a pandemic that has taken an outsized toll on African Americans, after months of burying its victims. I walked over to his grave and I could hear him talking to me, Shawn Troy said, his own voice breaking as he recalled kneeling beside the plot last September, on a low rise near 2 palmetto trees. And he said, "You got it. You can do it. This is what you were built for." He passed the baton on to me, so I've got to get running. He is hardly alone. Since the start of the pandemic, about 130 black morticians have died from COVID-19, according to the association that represents them. Deaths of funeral workers are not closely tracked. But the National Funeral Directors Association, which represents the broader industry, said it has not seen a corresponding rise in COVID deaths among its members. The deaths of black morticians are particularly notable because of the prominent role they have long played in many communities. Often admired for their success in business, a number have been elected to political office, served as local power brokers, and helped fund civil rights efforts. At the same time, the homegoing services they arrange have frequently served as communal touchstones, events as much about life as death, that draw mourners together with pageantry, preaching and song.
Black funerals are more celebration, and that's no disrespect to my colleagues across the country. We're more, I should say, intimate, said Hari P. Close, president of the National Funeral Directors and Morticians Association and the operator of a Baltimore funeral home. The association represents black morticians. When the pandemic hit, the very closeness and celebration that distinguish black funerals put morticians at risk, Close said. Their deaths have left some successors struggling to fill their role. It has really had an impact, particularly in African American funeral homes, he said. The deaths have come despite concerted efforts by morticians to protect themselves from the virus and limits imposed on the size and scope of burial gatherings to keep it from spreading. This year was unlike any other year I've ever lived through in the funeral service, said Edith Churchman, the 4th-generation owner of a mortuary in Newark, NJ that serves a largely black clientele. Dealing with an onslaught of COVID deaths, at first with limited personal protective equipment, and later with shortages of caskets and prepared burial plots, put pressure on funeral directors that far exceeded the demands at the peak of the AIDS epidemic, she said. "We were getting bombarded with COVID bodies," said Dr. Mary Gaffney, who stepped in to run her brother, Jeremiah's, funeral home in Inwood, New York, after he died of the virus last May. Adjusting the figures to account for age differences shows that blacks, Latinos, and Native Americans are 2 to 3 times more likely to die of the virus than white people, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. "Of course, you feared for your own safety," Churchman said. "You're kind of dangling on that precipice, saying what if?" In Mississippi, Luzerne Sonny Dillon and employees at his 2 funeral homes worked for months to fulfill COVID safety protocols, restricting gatherings. But Dillon, a widely known former councilman, continued his routine of spending time in the community, engaging people in conversation. People would be like, "You know, Mr. Sonny," and they'd just begin to talk and share things with him. It was just like a given, his wife, Georgia Dillon, said. In one of those conversations, early this year, a restaurant manager confided to Dillon that he'd lost 3 family members to COVID in a matter of weeks. The mortician extended his condolences, reassuring the man that, contrary to what some people said, the pandemic was very real. Those words proved prescient. A few weeks later, a funeral home employee tested positive, followed soon after by both of the Dillons. "Just in case I don't make it out of here, this is what I want you all to do," Sonny Dillon told his wife from a hospital bed in March. He died weeks later at 72. Georgia Dillon, a nurse, had long helped keep financial ledgers for the business. But her husband was the unquestioned consoler-in-chief, and she and other family members scrambled to keep the funeral homes in Macomb and Tylertown running in his absence. But there was little filling the role that Sonny Dillon occupied beyond the mortuary. In his 20s, he had been one of the first black candidates elected to local political office. Later, he worked with the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. to rename a boulevard for the slain civil rights leader. He pushed to get more black citizens to vote. Dillon's civic role fit a pattern common in many African American communities, where morticians have long been prominent, said Suzanne E. Smith, a professor at George Mason University who authored a book about the black funeral business. The best known include the Ford family of Memphis, Tennessee, funeral home operators who sent a father and son to Congress. In Detroit, funeral director Charles Diggs Sr. was a state legislator before his son won a seat in Washington and helped found the Congressional Black Caucus. In cities throughout the South, funeral directors often supplied the limousines for visiting civil rights leaders when they came to rally supporters. There's all this stuff going on in funeral homes that is not about burying the dead, but servicing the living, Smith said. By late this summer, Georgia Dillon was preparing to turn over the business to her daughter and son-in-law. Working together with employees at the funeral homes, the family is determined to maintain the business as Sonny Dillon would have run it. We talk and we cry, and we try to build each other up. We tell each other we've got to keep his legacy going, she said. In New York, Gaffney is trying to do much the same, but after years away from the funeral business. During the first months of the pandemic, Gaffney said she warned her brother, who had some chronic health issues, to isolate himself and let employees at the funeral home care for the bodies of the dead. But that was not his character. The funeral home, started by the Gaffneys' parents in the early 1970s, had long served mostly African American families in the city neighborhoods and suburban towns near John F. Kennedy International Airport.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe